Adonai, ma adam v'teda ehu, ben enosh v'techashvehu, adam lehevel dama, yamav kotel over baboker tzitz v'chalaf, la'erev yimolel v'yavesh, tashev enosh adaka v'tomer, shuvu v'nei adam. These are the words of the psalmist saying, Adonai, eternal God, what are we that you would even be mindful of us? What are we that you would even take note of us? We're all just a breath, our days a passing shadow. We come and go like grass, which in the morning it shoots up and is renewed, and in the evening of our lives it fades and withers. But God, you cause all of us to return unto dust, saying, Shuvu v'nei Adam, return, O mortal ones. Would that we were wise, and would that we understood whither we go from here, for when we die we carry nothing with us, not our glory, not our riches. But God, you say, Shmor tam urei yashar, mark the wholehearted, behold the upright. Those are the ones who shall find shalom, who shall find peace in the end. Friends, we gather this morning to remember one and honor one and establish a lasting memorial for one who was absolutely tam v'yashar. He was wholehearted and he was upright. He was decent, helpful, soft-spoken, a real mensch, Frank Gerber. Adonai mi agor ba'ohalecha, mi yishkon b'har kochecha. Eternal God, who may abide in your house? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, those who do justly, those who speak the truth within their hearts, those who would not slander others. All of these describe Frank Gerber. Those who would not wrong another or bring shame upon them, those who scorn lawlessness, and those who honor those who revere the Lord. They give their word, and come what may, they do not retract it. They would never exploit another. They would never take advantage of the vulnerable. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. I'll read now the 23rd Psalm in Hebrew, and you'll also find it in our handouts. After I read it in Hebrew, we can read the 23rd Psalm together in English. Adonai ro'i, lo echzar. Binot desher yorbitzeni, almei menuchot yinahaleni nafshi yeshovev. Yancheni v'magle tzedek lama'an shemo. Gam ki elech begeit salmavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema inachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorai. Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi ravaya. Ach tov v'chesed yudafuni kol yemei chaya. V'shavti v'veit Adonai L'orach Yamim. We read together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The third chapter of Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes, made popular in song, expresses this idea that everything in life unfolds the way it ought to, like this idea that there's a time and a place for everything that occurs under heaven. And honestly, sometimes, I would say more than sometimes, often life challenges that notion that things happen in the right way at the right time. We've certainly witnessed enough, we've all witnessed enough throughout our lives, including recently, to know that some things just ought not have happened at all, that there is not a right time for this thing to happen or that thing to happen. And yet our tradition still guides us in that direction. We are left to struggle with the idea. But it is beautiful and provides some perspective on the nature of the fleeting nature of life. La kol zman ve'et lecho chefetz tachat hashemayim. Et la ledet ve'et lamut. Et la ta'at ve'et la kor natua. Et lifrot ve'et livnot. Et livkot ve'et lischok. Et svod ve'et rakod. Et la hashlich avanim ve'et kenos avanim. Et la chavok ve'et lirchok mechabek. Et levakesh ve'et la'abed. Et lishmor ve'et lashlich. Et likroa ve'et lipor. Et lachshot ve'et lidaber. There is a season for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot that which is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve, a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time when we must refrain from our embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to discard, a time to tear, a time to sow, and a time for silence and a time to speak. Just a little more than a year ago, it was a time for tearing as the mourners tore their mourning garments or ribbons as a sign of their hurt at the loss of Frank and their father. And now it was then a time to speak, and now also a time to speak. The thing with sewing, our tradition allows when we tear, do the kriya, the tearing of ribbons or of garments, that we're allowed to continue wearing those garments. We could sew them up so you could see where the tear was, but the garment becomes whole in a sense again, but the mark of the mourning is still evidence. And so the mark of your mourning, losing your father, losing your beloved family member, friend, is still there, certainly. And yet there's a certain time when there's strength in the mending of that tear and in reflection. And so we reflect on Frank Gerber. I'll share a few words. Bill will say a few words to Frank too in a few minutes. Frank Sachs. There's a wonderful quote that's actually in our prayer books in the Shabbat morning prayer book that we use at Ezra Habonim, Niles Township Jewish Congregation, by Rabbi Israel Salanter. Rabbi Salanter was the founder of the Musar movement of Judaism, not an ancient movement, like 19th century movement of Jewish ethics and discipline. And Rabbi Salanter said, if you think of a reward, you think only of yourself. In other words, if you do a mitzvah, some good deed, following some commandment, thinking of a reward for doing it, you're thinking of yourself. You're not being selfless as our tradition wants us to be in performing mitzvot. Frank Gerber sought no reward. He was not that kind of person at all. He did mitzvot galore, but not for the glory, if you will. He did mitzvot of all sorts just because it was the right thing to do. And he did these mitzvot humbly, with like the right kavanah, the right intention and devotion and dedication to the mitzvah itself, to be kind to people, to help institutions and so forth. And he did not do it to get his name on a wall or anything like that. He did it because that's just who he was. It was the right thing to do. What kind of mitzvot? He did mitzvot for synagogues. I'm thinking in particular of Mikdash El, where he really was a leader of that congregation. He did it for our synagogue as well, just like Mr. Bill Gerber does mitzvot galore for our congregation in his generation, and which we greatly appreciate, Bill. Frank did mitzvot in his career helping young people, high school students in particular, who needed extra help as a counselor and a guide, was full of mitzvot. And as we were talking last year around this time, and as I knew from just knowing Frank, this was a calling for him. And I could just imagine the scores upon scores, so really hundreds upon hundreds over his long career in the school system of mitzvot he did for these people who just needed a little bit of extra help during formative years. And he did that. And I can imagine for the families of those kids, of those students, and for the students themselves, how grateful they must have been to be interacting with and guided by a man like Frank Gerber, truly. And he just did mitzvot in general among us, among his family and his friends. He was kind. There was never a harsh word coming from him. He was just a decent, fully decent person. And that is what we saw in the synagogue throughout the time that I knew him, and for all the years, in some cases much longer, that you all knew him. That's just the kind of man that he was. And who is not grateful for having such a person in our lives? He was devoted to his tradition, Jewish tradition. He was devoted to his family, to his beloved wife, Shirley, of course, and to his sons. And it's not like he would not at times, he was the more strict among the parents, I know. So he could, if he got a little frustrated with these three active sons, he would express his displeasure, I guess, but he could also always go downstairs, right, to his place where he had that train shrine and museum and workroom and everything else. And if anyone had the pleasure of being down there, you'll see how dedicated that he was to transport by train. If he would say, if a train couldn't get me there, he wasn't going there. And indeed, he did take lots of train journeys throughout his time. When people travel to the place to which we will all go but do not return from, there is obviously great sadness there. And that is what we feel reflecting on this last year without Frank Gerber. And I know the family in particular, his sons in particular, feel that way. We gather now, though, to remember what was beautiful in his life, and there was much of it, and to, in a sense, finalize or mark one important moment in that final journey by paying our respects now and establishing this lasting memorial, which we will do in a moment. It's now my pleasure to call forward our friend Bill Gerber.
What can I say about my dad, Frank? Today we're celebrating his life, and it's not a sad day. We're not going to let it get to us, because he lived a great life, and he was the most wonderful, greatest dad that we've ever had, and he was a great cousin. As I know him, as the senior cousin of all his first cousins. He really loved them all very much too. You know, they really had a great place in his heart. And my dad, it was so much. When I can remember taking him to the Ezra Habonim, the Niles Township Jewish congregation, every morning, Saturday morning. I used to be able to take him to the services on Saturday morning with his wheelchair, and I used to bring him in. And we had such great times there. And I took care of him while he was there. I brought him to the table for Kiddush, and I got him food and everything. And it was just the greatest time to spend with my dad. But I'm sorry. So I'll never forget the time. It was my dad didn't think it was very funny, but I took him to the restroom. It was kind of a, I had to take him to the restroom, help him out, and everything like that. And it was kind of interesting. I went out there. Left for a couple minutes, and all of a sudden, I figured out I'm missing something. And apparently, I forgot my dad. He was in the restroom, but he got he got mad at me for a few seconds, And then he laughed, and he thought it was very funny that I told him, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, but he really had a great sense of humor. He was a wonderful, wonderful person, and I am so glad. I know he's with my mother now. They're up there, and I'm sure they have, as my dad always loved every year, I'm sure my dad started a Passover Seder up there, and my mother's there, my Bubby and Zadie are there, so I'm sure they're all up there because he celebrating Pesach, and it's just he's just a wonderful, special dad. And I know on behalf of my brothers and everything, I really loved him, and I miss him. I know it's been a year, but he'll never be forgotten in our hearts and everything. And I appreciate everybody coming today and being here at the cemetery here. It really is great to see all these faces here today. Really special people in his lives, are all here. And thanks again for being here. And my dad, I wish you, and Mom, and of course my mother, I wish them good. I just wish them, I miss them very much. And I love you, Dad. And I hope everybody will remember him in their hearts. Because who's ever known him knew him very well. I wish a lot of people should have known him, but unfortunately they didn't, because he was sick for a while, for about 4 or 5 years, and we were so lucky to have Cherry in our lives, taking care of him. She was so wonderful to him. She was a great person, and I'm sure she misses him very much. And every time I think about it, she always used to call him Mr. Gerber, and all this and that. And thank you, Cherry, for all being there for my dad all these years through his life. And I love you, Dad, very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Frank Sachs.
I'm honored to speak a little bit about my cousin, first cousin and senior cousin, Frank Gerber. Frank Gerber is actually Franklin Gerber, and one of the things that is important to me is that he and I were named for the same person of blessed memory, which was Frank Rabinowitz. Sorry. Okay. Frank Rabinowitz was my grandfather, who neither of us knew, and three of us were named for him in our family. My cousin Ephraim, Frank Gerber, our senior cousin, and myself. And we were all named, the two of us were the only ones that were named Franklin. The reason why was because for some reason my Aunt Ruth and my mother at that time were enamored with Franklin D. Roosevelt, and who was Franklin Roosevelt, and so therefore they named us Franklin. Although I was told that Frank Rabinowitz, who Frank and I were named for, was never known as Franklin, but was known as Frank. And I think the things that I remember so much is my first time coming to Chicago. I think I was about 8 years old. I came on the train, and I stayed with my aunt and uncle. And Frank, my first outing in Chicago was to a train depot, and he took me to see the streetcars. He took me on the L, and he took me basically around. I remember some of the Evanston stations and the streetcars, and that was a love of his, and it was a lifelong love. And when I characterize my cousin, I think of a number of things. Number one is his dedication to family, and not only was he a great cousin, but because he had no brothers and sisters, we were his like surrogate brothers. and he treated us extremely well. He was extremely generous, and he was one of the most humble people I've ever known. And he wasn't totally non-materialistic, totally cared about others, and cared about his cousins. And so I would say, his dedication to Judaism, his dedication to family, huge, particularly Passover. There wasn't a Passover that he or my aunt and uncle didn't host, and he reveled in that, and he made sure that his cousins were there and that it was loud and boisterous, and lots of singing of Chad Gad Yol and to the top of our lungs, very much out of tune. Also, in terms of, Frank and I there's quite a bit of age difference, but we had a lot in common in the sense that we both taught in Chicago public schools. We also both studied business education, and Frank taught business education before he became a counselor, and then he dedicated more than 40 years to teaching kids with disabilities, and both physical and cognitive. And he had a tremendous career, highly educated, very strong academic background. And so I think of him about 3 or 4 things. Number one, his dedication to Judaism. Number two, his extreme dedication to family, his kindness, and his humbleness. And people say that in Judaism, there's a question of whether or not we have heaven or hell and how we remember people. And I think the biggest legacy of Franklin Gerber is that, the highest compliment is how someone lives on and how they live on. And it's in the hearts and the minds of the people that knew him. I think that's really the testament of greatness and kindness and humbleness. And I think, at least for me, he will live on forever in my heart and mind. And it was really an honor just to be his cousin and to be around him and to be influenced by him. So, Franklin, I love you. And Frank, we're going to miss you. But we're never going to forget you.
Thank you, Frank Sachs. In Torah, it talks about, the book of Genesis, how Jacob set up a matzeva, a pillar upon the grave of his beloved Rachel, and that is what we are doing today with this dedication and unveiling ceremony, setting up a lasting memorial for Frank Gerber. And so those who come, who have mourned, return to this space to express undying attachment to their beloved. Remembering now the moments shared, times of celebration, times of challenge, times of warmth and closeness and guidance and love and companionship. We pray, O God, that you will treasure all that was good in Frank's life, and that you will help all of us to retain that goodness which is abundant and to weave it into the very fabric of our own lives. As we dedicate this memorial, help us, O God, to honor his memory by our actions and our aspirations. May the memory of him, as we have discussed, lead us to love you, O God, and to love each other with all of our hearts. Then indeed will that memory be for blessing. In the name of the family of Frank Gerber and in the presence of relatives and friends, we now consecrate this memorial as a sign of love and respect. Wonderful. Ephraim ben Yitzchak, beloved father, husband, and grandfather, Franklin E. Gerber, March 30, 1939, July 24, 2021. It's a beautiful, beautiful stone. If it is comfortable for you to rise, Please do so for the El Malay Rachamim. It's okay. Jehi Nishmato Turar B'Tzor HaChaim. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. El Malay Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, Im Kedoshim Utohorim, Kezohar Harakim Asirim, Et Nishmat, Ephraim ben Yitzchak, Shahalach L'Olamo. Ba'al HaRachamim Yastirechu, B'Ser Tekanafav L'Olamim, V'yitzor b'tzor ha'chaim et nishmato. Adonai v'nechalato, v'yanuach b'shalom, al mishkavo, v'nomar. Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Frank Gerber, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence and within the shadow of your wings. Let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. We will conclude the service with Mourner's Kaddish, which is on our handouts. Yitgadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah. Be'alma Didra Pirtei Yamlich Maputei B'chayikon U'yomekon U'chayei L'chol Beit Yisrael Ba'agala U'yizman Kari Yimuru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba L'barach L'olam U'lamei Amayan Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitma'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yithadar V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shmei Kusha Rihu the Eva Nimpo Birchata Bashirata, Tushbekata Benechamata, Da'amiran De'ama Dimaru Amen. Yehei Shlam Arab Amin Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'alchol Yisrael, De'yimru Amen. O Seh Shalom B'mamad, Hu Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu V'alchol Yisrael, De'yimru Amen. Zifronot and Bracha. May Frank Gerber's memory be for blessing. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all very much. This concludes our service. There are stones here that Chicago Jewish Funerals has provided for us. You can place a stone on the grave of your loved ones at this time if you would like to do that. The stone evokes that matzeba, that pillar that Jacob set up on Rachel's grave, and it also demonstrates the durability, the enduring nature of love which is stronger than death. Thank you very much.